Hey guys, what's up? Evrelia here. Today I want to rant a little bit about soloing old content. I used to get asked a lot, why do you solo these bosses? Why do you do it? And the main reason obviously is that I enjoy it a hell of a lot. Outside of raiding, soloing is basically the only thing I do in World of Warcraft that I actually enjoy doing. And the reason for that is that it is extremely challenging. But not only that, I believe the challenge that it offers actually makes you a better player. A much better player, in fact. When Mists of Pandaria first came out, Affliction was the soloing spec. The only spec that we had that could solo hard content was Affliction. Destruction and Demonology, they just couldn't cut it. Destruction was good enough for soloing like really old content like TBC and early Wrath content, but they were never really challenging. Affliction was the spec you had to play in order to solo the harder bosses like the Cataclysm bosses and the later heroic Wrath bosses. And I soloed a lot of bosses as Affliction, and as a result of that, I was a really good Affliction warlock. But at the time, when it came to playing other specs like Demonology or Destruction, I could do it, but I found I had to really concentrate on what I was doing, which usually meant I wasn't performing as well as I could be. Soloing hard bosses requires you to know your class completely and utterly. It forces your abilities to become muscle memory because you need them to be. And I'm not just talking about your DPS spells either, I'm talking about every ability your class has available because it will help keep you alive. It forces you to ask questions rather than just following the norm. As an example, when I first started soloing Madness of Deathwing back in 5.0, it was an intense damage check. I had to multi-dot a lot of different targets a lot perfectly, even though they were really spread apart, which meant I couldn't just use my add-ons to keep track of the dots on those targets. I had to know exactly how long my dots would be lasting and when I should be refreshing them without being able to physically see them. I had to use my defensive cooldowns perfectly and keep my pet alive whilst also executing really high DPS on the right targets at the right times. I had to know exactly when my cooldowns would become available. I had to figure out which talents to take: Sacrificial Pact, Dark Regeneration, Soul Leech, Soul Link, Dark Bargain, Death Coil, Shadow Fury. Decisions I had to make through trial and error and understanding encounter mechanics. After figuring out which ones were contributing the most to my survival, I had to learn their timing so that I could ensure I had a cooldown for each and every damage spike in the encounter. And at first I spent so much time concentrating on this that I kept messing other things up, but eventually it gets to the point where it's muscle memory and you don't even need to think about it. I just knew. Oh, this cooldown goes here, or oh, I'm taking damage. This is the exact moment when I use Dark Regeneration. You just know. But not only defensive cooldowns, it also applies to your ability to DPS. I see a lot of people that know how to play Affliction on single target, but they aren't amazing at keeping track of dots on multiple enemies and keeping their uptime high enough. This is the same for Demonology and Destruction. It just comes down to knowing exactly when your dots are going to run out without having to see them directly. Back in 5.0, I never played Destruction. I knew the theory behind it, I knew the theory perfectly well, but when trying to play in a complicated solo scenario, I couldn't maintain the damage required whilst also surviving and executing the encounter mechanics perfectly because I just wasn't used to the spec. It wasn't muscle memory, I had to literally concentrate on everything I was doing. I see a lot of people have this problem with the Demonology opener. As a warlock, you should have every single one of your abilities that you will ever use in combat keybound. Every single one. Because using these cooldowns at important moments will save your life. A lot of warlocks struggled with the Green Fire quest, and still do. I still get people asking me if I can help them with the Green Fire quest, because it requires so much knowledge of your class and juggling multiple mechanics, whilst also being able to do high damage and use your survival cooldowns perfectly. Being able to deal high damage alone is not enough. You have to be able to deal the damage where it counts, and also juggle the mechanics of the encounter perfectly. You have to know your abilities and you have to have everything appropriately keybound. When I got to this quest, I did absolutely no research about the fight and knew absolutely nothing about what the fight involved or how to counter it or what abilities he had or anything like that, but I killed it in just a few pulls. The fight required you to micromanage your pet, albeit a pet unique to this encounter with unique abilities, but that doesn't change anything, the principles are still the same. The default pet command keybinds suck. Plain and simple, they suck. Doing something simple like having your pet abilities bound to accessible keys on your keyboard that you know and can access immediately, and having key bindings for basic things like moving your pet makes an enormous level of difference. This fight was hard for most because you had to use Sacrificial Pact at a moment's notice and micromanage your pet and move him away at the correct moments. You had to stun the Fell Hunters whilst you nuked them down, you had to fear and banish the Doom Guards, and you had the option to use your gateway and teleports to avoid certain mechanics. The fight itself is unique, yes, but the principles of juggling many things at once can be applied to many encounters in the game. If you're having to concentrate on basic things like your rotation, how can you possibly excel? You can't. Ask yourself this. How many of you actually glyph and use Curse of Exhaustion on Tortos or Council of Elders? How many of you regularly stun ads with Shadow Fury? Can you tell me instantly, without having to think, what keys your Sacrificial Pact, Dark Bargain, Healthstone, Dark Regeneration, Unending Resolve, Ember Tap, or Mortal Coil are bound to? Could you use them instantly when you needed to? Did you know that your Voidwalker will do more DPS than your other pets whilst tanking, and that he has a 60% shield wall which makes him extremely good for Dark Animus? If you saw someone's ad running loose, could you taunt it with only 1 second's notice? Do you even know what your Voidwalker's taunt is bound to? I'm still surprised by how many Warlocks don't even know basic things like their Demonic Gateway has an aggro reset, or that their Felguard has Threatening Presence on by default, or that you can abuse Unending Resolve to make it double dip with Dark Bargain. Yes, I'm picking extreme niche examples which may only be useful in a handful of situations, but the principles behind what I'm saying will apply to every single encounter in this game. Soloing old content forces you to manage your cooldowns appropriately, forces you to learn how to pull high DPS, control multiple targets, execute your rotation without thinking about it, whilst surviving fight mechanics. And no, I'm not talking about going back and soloing things that die in 2 hits. It has to be challenging content that engages your brain. And the thing is, it's not only solo fights that you can learn these skills in. You could learn them in arena, you can learn them in raids, and, well, probably not LFR because LFR is a complete joke, but you get the point. The idea is, you can't raid all the time, so you can't be constantly improving your skills, but you can do things like solo and arena whenever you want. And this is a perfect opportunity to develop your skills as a warlock further.